Subcommittee meeting to order. The time is 6:06. Today is Monday, May 4th, 2020. Our next meeting will take place Monday, June 1st at 6 p.m. Hopefully in person. One can always wish. We're going to gavel in tonight's meeting in honor of Teachers Appreciation Week. And before we begin, I do have to read the protocols in accordance with the format that we're using tonight to meet. So bear with me for a second. In accordance with Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 23, 2020 revised guidance on order by the Governor prohibiting assemblage of more than 10 people. This meeting will be conducted via remote participation. In-person attendance by members of the public is prohibited, and all effort will be made to permit public attendance of this meeting in the manner specified below, which is via remote access by internet, telephone, and if available, via public broadcast of the meeting by Malden Access Cable Television on public access television channels. Public access will also be provided by posting draft minutes and/or a transcript, recording, or record of the meeting on the City of Malden website at cityofmalden.org as soon as practicable after the meeting. We also want to say if you wish to participate in the public comment portion of the meeting, you may do so by entering the Zoom meeting and clicking on the Q&A button, then click Ask Question. In the question box that is shown, we ask that you enter your full name, your home address for the record. This will give us a time-stamped request that you want to speak, and we will then respond to these requests during the public comments section of the meeting in the order that we receive them. When it is your turn to speak, our Director of Communications, Ron Cochran, will announce your name and will unmute your line and allow you to speak. As always, we ask that you keep your comments to a few minutes, and if you are unable to participate in this way and you would still like to offer a comment, you may email your full name, home address, and comment to sdorai, D-O-R-A-I, at maldenps.org prior to 12 o'clock p.m. on the day of the meeting. Please keep these written comments under 300 words. Now, we did not receive any of those for this evening's meeting. But for those that are watching or attending, that is an option going forward if you wanted to email us prior to the meeting happening. If you are unable to participate electronically in either of the methods mentioned above, or you're in need of any special accommodations, please contact us at 781-397-6100 prior to 12 o'clock p.m. on the day of the meeting. So tonight's agenda will consist of us taking a moment, as always, to pledge allegiance to our flag. We'll then ask everyone to remain standing for a moment of silence in honor of all those who have fought for our country and continue to do so today. We'll then have our clerk call the roll to ensure that we have a quorum sufficient to meet this evening. And then we will get into tonight's agenda, which consists of the approval of the minutes, public comment, a report from our superintendent, subcommittee reports and discussions, motions and resolutions, personal privilege, executive session, and then adjournment. So if there's no questions, I'd ask everyone to please rise and salute our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing for a moment of silence in honor of all those who have fought for our country and continue to do so today. Thank you. We'll now have our clerk call the roll.
Mayor Christensen,
Here.
Mr. Drummy,
Here.
Mr. Froyo, Mr. Gray,
Here.
Mr. Iovino,
Here.
Ms. Luong,
Here.
Mr. McCarthy,
Here.
Ms. Spatafora,
Here.
Mr. Weldai,
Here.
Superintendent Oteri,
Here.
Student Representative Chouiki.
Here.
All right, we have a quorum sufficient to meet, so let's get into this evening's agenda, starting with approval of minutes. Regular session minutes of April 6th, 2020.
Motion to accept.
Motion by Mr. Iovino,
Second.
seconded by Mr. Froyo. Everybody's had a chance to look at those minutes. Any questions?
No.
Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Anybody opposed? The ayes have it. The minutes from April 6th are adopted unanimously. Now the executive session minutes of April 6th, 2020.
Motion to approve.
Motion by Ms. Spatafora, seconded by Mr. McCarthy. Any questions on those? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 Anybody opposed? The ayes have it. That carries unanimously. Now down to item 2, public comment. This is an opportunity for the public to address the school committee. As we stated, we just ask that you state your name and address for the record, and please be brief in your remarks. Public comment is now open.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just a quick reminder of the process. We did have a few folks reach out and they were indicating their comment inside the Q&A, which is just a bit off of what we're asking. So I'm going to go ahead and remind folks the procedure. The procedure is to click on the Q&A button and then click Ask Question. And then in that question box, you enter your full name and home address for the record. And we will then call your name in the order that it was received. So I'm going to go ahead and work with the few folks that have done that the opposite way. And we'll, in the meantime, call who is first queued up. And that is Miss Deb Gesualdo she's MEA president of 34 Abington Road in Danvers. And one moment while I unmute your line, Deb. Deb, go ahead.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Deb
Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor Christensen, Superintendent Oteri, and members of the Malden School Committee. I hope that you and your loved ones are all safe and well during this time. As you all know, this week is National Teacher Appreciation Week. And I wanted to express my appreciation for all of our teachers, as well as all Malden Public Schools employees. Since March 13th, I've seen literally hundreds of school employees go far above and beyond the basic asks of their jobs, all while in a crisis situation. Many are doing this all while teaching their own children at home, caring for loved ones who are sick while they themselves are sick, or while grieving the loss of friends and family due to COVID-19. Teachers and other school employees are actively involved in the mutual aid network in Malden. Custodians are not only working hard to keep our school buildings free from contamination, but they are helping to distribute food to students. Our school nurses are working side by side with the Board of Health. Counselors and psychologists are providing important mental health resources to our most vulnerable students and their families. ESPs are working side by side with teachers to do individual outreach to students and families. School administrators are supporting educators and helping to coordinate the distribution of resources. Food service workers are helping to disrupt the cycle of hunger for hundreds of students in Malden. Right now, in the midst of a world that seems as though it's on fire, our teachers and school employees are doing what I would call relief work in the time of crisis. So I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart to all teachers and all school employees for the work you're doing right now. You're all heroes in my eyes.
Thank you. Very well said.
Thank you, Ms. Gesualdo. I will go ahead and mute your line. And let me just check in on the next available attendee. One moment. Next in line, we have Dawn O'Toole of 130 Adams Street in Malden. One moment while I unmute your line, Dawn. Go ahead, Dawn.
Good evening.
Can you hear me?
Yep, good evening.
Okay. Good evening. First, I hope all of you and your families are well during these unusual times. Second, thank you for all the hard work the school department is doing for all our students. As a parent of an 8th grader, I understand all of their end-of-year events are now canceled. My question is, will these students and those students at the high school at least be getting a yearbook? A lot of students did a lot of hard work through this year to get everything ready. And my son happens to be on the BB yearbook committee, and we're just waiting to see if this is something that can be done. Even if it is something that they receive in the fall, this is something that I hope that is doable for them so that they have something to at least remember their last year at one of our K-8 schools. Thank you.
All right, and Dawn, can you just state your address for the record?
Oh, sorry. 130 Adams Street, Malden.
Okay, we typically don't do a, back and forth during public comment, but I'm going to make an exception on this one. Superintendent, can you shed some light as to whether or not we are going to make something happen along the lines of what Ms. O'Toole's asking about?
I know at the high school, the Maldonian, has been going forward. I'll double check on the K-8s. I know that we have advisors in place, but I will get an answer in the next day or two as to where we stand on it. But my hope would be that we would be able to get that.
Yeah, agreed. And when you respond to Ms. O'Toole, can you just CC us, the school committee? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Dawn's line has been muted. We're now moving on to Dawn Macklin of 36 Dartmouth Street in Malden. Dawn, let me go ahead and unmute your line.
Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening. Welcome, Ms.
I hope
Macklin.
everyone is keeping safe. This is Dawn Macklin from 36 Dartmouth Street in Malden. And I wanted to just comment on the remote learning, where I know we're all, this is all new for everyone. And I think that now we're kind of in a groove, except for we have a special education, special needs child at home. And he seems to be struggling, not having the structure of the classroom. And it's difficult for us without the training to get him the proper tools that he needs to be successful and to continue with his learning. So I'm hoping that we can visit some sort of structure that we can put in place with speech, and maybe do that via Zoom or remotely, and just some of the services that the children had in the classroom, if we can somehow look into implementing them during this remote learning time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Once again, not customary, but Superintendent, I'd ask you to comment on that. I know this is something you and I talk about on a weekly basis. Is progress being made?
Yes, we'll be addressing it. We've been negotiating with the Malden Education Association as well, too.
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Macklin.
And Dawn's line has been muted, and we are now moving on to our next requested speaker, and that is Sandy Sullivan of 22 Rand Street in Malden. Let me go ahead and unmute your line. One moment, Sandy. I'm actually having a difficult time finding. Oh, there we are. Okay, yeah. So one moment. Go ahead, Sandy. Sandy, let me unmute you one more time. Go ahead.
Ms. Sullivan, good evening.
Hi, this is Sandy Sullivan from 22 Rand Street in Malden. I'm a para at the ELC.
Mhm.
And I'm just wondering what's going on with the para contract.
Okay. Is that all you had for remarks, or?
That's it.
Okay. Well, it's an item on the agenda this evening, so we'll keep you posted.
Will there be answers tonight?
I'm not sure. But either way, I'm sure someone from the administration will get back to the board.
You mean like superintendent or yourself to Deb
Exactly.
Gesualdo?
Yeah.
Hmm.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you for your work.
Okay, Sandy's line is muted, and let me just do one last check here to make sure I'm not missing anyone. I believe we've come to the end of all our folks that have been queued up. And yes, that concludes all the public comment requests for now.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Cochran, for helping us with that. All right, now we're going to move to the superintendent's report, item number 3 on the agenda. Let's go to Superintendent O'Teary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, School Committee and City of Malden. First update here is on the remote learning plan survey. In your packet, you have the survey results through April 24th. The spreadsheet has 341 responses, which includes translations from Chinese, Haitian, Creole, Portuguese, Spanish, and Arabic. There were no responses in Vietnamese or Amharic. The survey was open until Thursday, the 30th, and we are compiling and analyzing the results for the remote learning plan going forward. We will update the committee once all survey responses are compiled and analyzed. We are also in the process of receiving requests right now for the final Chromebook distribution, which will be delivery. Devices requested at this point are over 500, combined with the 756 that we distributed in April and the 1,800 that are out in the high school. We will have over 3,000 Chromebooks in students' hands, which is remarkable. This time, thanks to the volunteer crew of Malden Neighbors, these Chromebooks will be delivered from May 7th to May 12th. Originally, the 5 days were scheduled. We added the 5th day for May 12th. I would like to thank Kit Bridge for coordinating this effort on behalf of the Malden Neighbors Helping Neighbors. Our first priority was to get a Chromebook in the hands of those families who lacked a device. The next round is meant to get the device into some of those families who missed the first distribution, but then also that may need an additional one. Again, we did prioritize our families that were lacking a device. Along the same lines, we have been compiling a list of our families that are without internet access. As of about an hour ago, we were at, I think, 91 families that do not have internet access in the Malden Public Schools. This was by building principals checking in with all the families in their building. We have ordered hotspots, along with the rest of the planet seems to be gobbling these up. They hopefully will be in. They're out of stock. They'll be in on May 10th. And we did put in for a 2-day delivery. So when those come in, we will be able to distribute those to families. This is a very high demand item, but this will help, again, with the equity and the access for many of our families. So we're very happy to be able to do that and help, I think, in many ways, level the playing field for our families. The Special Needs Remote Learning Plan, IEP 504 Reevaluation Service Gap Plan Update. The Malden Public Schools Special Ed Remote Learning Plan is in your packet. The plan states that the special educators, along with general educators, are responsible for the delivery of free and appropriate education, which is FAPE, during this remote learning plan. Each special educator is responsible for reviewing the IEP and contributing to the individual remote learning plan for the students. The recommended plan will be sent to parents in the form of an N1. Students are expected to participate in the services if possible and will be provided with credit or no credit basis, as is the guideline. Our students will be provided with his or her special educational services throughout the remote learning opportunities to the best of the district's abilities. The students' IEP and 504 plan accommodations will be adhered to by the special education teacher in terms of goals and recommendations. Excuse me. Ancillary services will be provided throughout activities, through activities to families and guardians by means of their special education teacher or educational support teachers. This may be provided individually, in small groups, or in whole groups, as the teachers and therapists believe to be the most effective in this environment. Per updated federal and state level special ed guidance, IEP meetings will be conducted in order to maintain adherence to the timelines and deadlines. Meetings will be held remotely with the consent of parents that are currently scheduled. This plan will be reviewed continuously and updates will be made in the event the Department of Education, school committee, district administration, or the federal government requires changes. An update on the Sandy Hook Say Something Bullying Prevention and Social Emotional Learning update. Our guidance director, Ms. Erin Craven, and physical education, health and athletics director, Mr. Charlie Conifrey, were unable to meet with our counselors, social workers, health and phys ed teachers for the plan's professional development on March 13th as school was canceled. This was a planned discussion time for the Sandy Hook Say Something project, but Director Conifrey and Craven are working on creating and distributing a survey virtually to all of the above listed parties to once again to try to accurately capture the social emotional learning and curriculum already in play in the Malden Public Schools with our students. We are hopeful we can provide an update on this at the school committee meeting in June. Specific to the Say Something program through the Sandy Hook Foundation, Director Craven has discussed and shared info with school guidance counselors in grades 6 through 12 with two current goals in mind. One is to have all of the 6 to 12 counselors trained on the Say Something program by the end of this school year. And two, to plan a fall lesson presentation at both the middle and 9th grade levels. Given the uncertainty and the abruptness of this global pandemic taking hold, no further concrete plans have yet been made. As soon as Director Craven has any updates, I will provide them to the school committee as well. Social emotional needs update. Throughout our closure, the social emotional needs of our students and families have been paramount. Our school adjustment counselors, school psychologists, and guidance counselors have been making themselves available to our students on request by teacher, principal, or family, and through their IEP or 504, through one-to-one phone calls, emails, Google Meets, or Google Classroom. The level of contact is based on priority of need and the plan in place. All school guidance counselors and adjustment counselors have regular office hours every week for all students to engage with their counselors regarding specific questions, to say hello or just to set up a time to meet. All counselors in the 6 to 12 have Google Classrooms and or weekly newsletters set up now as a familiar platform to reach out to students, support them in a multitude of ways, and share simple strategies for being well. Many of our counselors have small group and lunch bunches happening at grade levels for all students. Since our first week away from school, the counselors have provided a robust list of sites and organizations for students and families to utilize, depending on their unique needs. They are located on the Malden Public Schools enrichment site within each grade level area. In the case of social emotional issues that are popping up unexpectedly in virtual classroom settings, we have a district-wide procedure in place for teachers to follow to ensure the immediate well-being of our students. We've also continued to engage with Elliott Family Services for our students who may need ongoing family resources during this time. The dyslexia kindergarten testing rollout for July. When Assistant Superintendent Mr. Michael Wood met with the team last, they decided to proceed with the new DIBBLS assessment for K to 8 as our dyslexia screening tool. We already use a previous edition and believe it presents a strong component to our literacy program, so teachers can use that data in planning instruction and monitoring progress. We have them in kindergarten screening. We will have them ready for kindergarten screening once we get back to school. They will be administered. Ms. Janice Raymond will train the teachers as necessary for implementation. The next phase of our work is to decide literacy programs and strategies to use when the students fall below benchmark. An update on the CARES Act. The CARES Act, as people may recall, is the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, which was signed into law on March 27th. The Malden Public Schools will be working with our state delegation as well as the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to see what programs of funding will be available for the district through the various federal programs, including the CARES Act. As of now, it appears that we may receive some good news under the CARES Act in the form of potential eligibility that would be in proportion potentially with our Title I funding. On our call this morning with the Commissioner of Education, he had noted that the state has required all the necessary paperwork, has filed that with the federal government. There's potential amounts. They haven't released that publicly, but when we do get word of that, or if we get word of that, we will notify the committee as soon as we can. Nothing has been finalized, but we are optimistic that with the myriad of programs available, we will be able to get some additional funding. The funding is very flexible in how it can be used. It can be used anything through funding through IDEA, the McKinney-Vento Act, ESRA, ESEA, a variety of programs like that, preparing for COVID-19, training our staff for individual school needs and resources that may be available, English learners, students experiencing homelessness in foster care, a whole host of resources that this money can be used to help fund. So we're just waiting for word going forward as to what our eligibility and what award we will be given if we're so fortunate. Some updates on the end of the school year activities for the high school. The administration of Malden High School has been in constant contact with central office around these events. Malden High School will make every effort to honor some of our long traditions. Many adjustments will be made to ensure the safety of all. If we can have these events, attending people, keeping their safety as the highest priority. Some of the adjustments noted in your packet are there. Graduation, which was scheduled for Sunday, May 31st, will be rescheduled for sometime in early August. We will comply with any of the local, state, and federal mandates around restrictions and social distancing guidelines, as well as what the number would be on assembly at that point. If the mandates do not allow for a large gathering, we will look for a new date or come up with an alternative plan as well. We would, if we do have graduation at McDonald Stadium, we would be limiting the tickets as well as the attendees. We would also live stream this on Facebook, as well as continue to have it recorded by Malden Cable Access. Our scholarship and awards night is a very big tradition where I think we get to showcase and honor the partnership with our community. Many people have scholarships endowed in the memory of loved ones there. That is scheduled the last week in May at the Jenkins Auditorium. It's usually a very well-attended event, but unfortunately we cannot hold that event this year. We will be proceeding with the awards and scholarships, and they will be announced really in the form of almost a press release that will be published locally with the award, the scholarship name, the award, and the recipient or recipients as necessary. Another honored tradition is the National Honor Induction Ceremony. That is also part of that senior week, right around with the Scholarship Awards Night. Again, this one is held in Jenkins Auditorium. The highlight of that being the student testimonials, which are read aloud. In place of this, we are looking to proceed this as a video event that we will have each student give a 30 to 45 second, for instance, testimonial of who they'd like to thank. and then have our folks stitch it together so it actually will be a video that they will have going forward. Looking to have the speeches read as well as the lighting of the candles. It's a very, very powerful and very thoughtful event that we're hoping to honor this time virtually. And of course, the big event is the prom, which was originally scheduled for May 22nd at the Danversport Yacht Club. Danversport has canceled all events through May 4th, which I think is in compliance with what the guidelines were from the governor. Right now, it's canceled through May 18th. They provided very few dates, mostly at the end of the summer, to reschedule. Although we are still investigating possible dates for the prom at Danversport, Malden High School could host something, and we could maybe possibly utilize the courtyard and the gallery, the gym for an event going forward, maybe this summer. We could allow students to come back to Malden High School for one more night. The class of 2020 has raised sufficient funds during their time at Malden High School, which will allow for a prom to be held, and I put prom in quotes, free of charge at Malden High School, as the expenses could be covered. We would also look to aim to have this as a real community event, which I think would be a really nice way to, send it off. And I think we're fortunate that we do have a courtyard there. And if we're allowed to, under our guidelines and protocols at the time, I think that Principal Mastrangelo and his team really would love to be able to have this event, because it does mean a lot. I think people have gone ahead and purchased, obviously, some of the gowns and other accoutrements with the prom. So we're hopeful that we can provide something like that this late spring or summer. Also along those lines is the senior cookout. That's another great event, and we would be looking to have something like this later in the summer as maybe an end of the summer celebration for the class of 2020 before they head off to the next chapter of their lives. And then lastly, on our 8th grade moving up ceremonies, principals will be working on a way to celebrate our 8th graders. We'll be moving up to the high school next year. They have been working in a collaborative manner, and hopefully we'll have something ready in the next day or two that we will be able to honor that. And I know that Mr. Dolan down at the Early Learning Center is working on something with our pre-K moving up ceremonies for those youngsters too. New guidance for our remote learning experiences. Those I had forwarded you from the Department of Education, Commissioner Riley, a week or so ago. We received them on the 24th, late Friday evening. It was 73 pages of guidelines from the state. It's a dense series of documents that include not only guidance, but 2 other documents containing a series of prerequisite standards to be addressed during this time. We're working on tweaking the current learning plan, but most of what we have, most of what it is in the new guidance is already being addressed and in our remote learning plan with and being promulgated by our educators here in Malden. We'll finalize this upon discussion with the Malden Education Association. We have another meeting set up this week. In this situation, everything is constantly moving, evolving, and we are keeping up with it the best we can. One thing we know is that unlike other districts, our directors and their teams of teachers stay 1 week ahead. They meet throughout the week and develop lessons and activities that are aligned to the standards. These activities can then be shared in a weekly update with Assistant Superintendent Dr. Kelly Chase. Educators can then use the links to craft their weekly plan and share with students and their families. This ensures that teachers across the district are in sync and addressing the same standards and using many of the same activities. Grading. In your packet, you will see a document that provides recommendation for grading that the schools are going to implement based on the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education's advice. At this time, I would call upon Assistant Superintendent Dr. Kelly Chase, Malden High School Principal Chris Mastrangelo, and our Director of Guidance, Erin Craven, to explain the grading for the remote learning plan.
All right, good evening.
Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Kelly.
Nice to see everybody. It's
Yeah.
it's strange to work in isolation. So just want to acknowledge that. So we have been working diligently behind the scenes. Every time we seem to come up with a new policy or a new written document, the rules change on us again and we have to adapt. So if there's one thing that we learned during this is that we're not as type A as we used to be. We have to be able to roll with the punches a little bit. So that's been a very difficult lesson for me. I like things tidied up with a bow, and it's not happening as often as I'd like. So that being said, grading is no exception. So grading is one of those things that teachers, from the moment you walk into your first teaching position, you are thinking about grading. How do you assess students? How do you let parents and families know how students are doing? And so this is something that's been a real struggle for us from the beginning, because you can't really say school without grades in the paradigm that we've had. So that being said, we've had to do a little bit of an adjustment in the way that we think about teaching and learning, and then the follow-up grades that go along with that. So what we have done is we have combed through the guidelines that are out there right now, with the idea that remote learning, for as many different kids as we have engaging in remote learning, that's how many different scenarios we have. That's how many different ways that kids are accessing. Some might have parents that aren't necessarily working on a 40-hour, 50, 60-hour work week and can sit side by side with the child. Others are pretty much doing this on their own, and then there's everything in between. And so we really need to be cognizant of not just what work is being done, but how our kids access that work. So given the fact that we're on our second round of handing out computers, and we've got several hundred, that tells us that families are in many different places about how they're accessing the curriculum. And therefore, that informs us about how we need to do our Learning Plan 2.0 and how we need to look at grading. So in our approach on this, we looked at grading as a way to articulate how our kids are engaging with that remote learning. Not necessarily are you scoring 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 on the weekly assignment, but do you have access to the learning, and can we adjust that with standards so that we can give some sort of assessment for when kids come back to us of what they might have worked on while they were not with us physically. From there, we want to be able to assess kids when they come back into our buildings and really come up with some plans for them to meet them where they're at. So if you're someone that has just plowed through the material, be able to meet you at that place just as much as we can meet someone that has struggled with the remote learning all along, and be able to carve out a specific plan that works for the individual student. So in accordance with the guidelines, we looked at a complete versus an incomplete, which is a letter combination that our Aspen system can handle. So we were really tied to what our computer system can do, along with how do we fit in with the guidelines. So for students who are at the K through 8 level, we are looking at putting in a grade that represents that they have engaged in that remote learning. And then at the end of term 3 and term 4, which we're proposing on combining, there would be a P for pass, but not necessarily pass in the way we've traditionally thought of it, but pass as in you've passed the work in and it shows the level of competency. And that might look different from kid to kid. Maybe someone could show that competency in fewer assignments that they were able to access, but to give the teachers in the following year a sense of where a student is at. We don't want grades and access to remote learning to become a stress on families and become something that we use as a punitive measure. And so therefore, we're proposing that we would do an incomplete. So the student has not met that competency as of yet. And how do we then help them get to that? And so one of the important pieces of the remote learning up until this point has been contacting every student that we haven't heard from, including students that may not have access to remote learning or may have indicated that they had trouble checking in with teachers. And so the way that we've worked with that is each week when the teachers are interacting with kids, they are taking notes about who might be engaging and who's not engaging. Those lists get turned over to the building principal and their team, and then in turn, the administrators and building team will reach out to those families. So we want this to be not a punitive case, but rather, how do we help you reach those learning goals? So the final grade for the year on the K through 8 report cards, we're looking at P for as in they've passed on, or an incomplete as in there's work that still needs to be done. That, of course, is subject to additional guidance that we might get from the state later this week. So always in our plans, one thing we've also learned is that things change quickly and often. And so we want to make allowances to be able to adjust as we need to. For our pre-K students, our littlest learners, they're in a different situation. They typically see 2 reports, one around January at the mid-year point, and then one towards the end of the year. What is difficult about that situation is that those reports are really based on teachers' observations, and the observations should be occurring in the child's natural learning setting. So teachers will make observations as kids play on the playground, walk in the hallways, interact in the classroom, maybe the way that they behave at lunch with one another. And so without the ability to be able to watch those kids as they interact with one another and engage in the learning, we would be proposing at the pre-K level to not have that final assessment, but instead look to the kindergarten screening that we do before every child enters into Malden Public Schools kindergarten, and then looking at assessments when they come back in and then are in their natural setting. And that would allow for us, again, to meet kids where they are. There's a special education component there that Assistant Superintendent Michael Wood can address about what we do with our youngest learners who might be on an individualized education plan and how to report the progress on that. Moving on to the high school, I guess before questions, I'll turn it over to Mr. Mastrangelo and Ms. Craven so they can talk about how that might look at the high school, which is kind of an island in and of itself.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chase. Hello, Mr. Mayor. Hello.
Good evening.
The school committee. Well, thank you for letting us come in and take some time to go through this process with you all. So, and I'm going to bring Ms. Craven in when we get specifically to how we calculate the GPA and such, and how that's going to appear on the transcript. But to start, in line with what the K-8s did, we initially looked at this whole grading process through the lens of what's best for students, knowing that this is unprecedented and unsettling times. We wanted to find a way that we could put together something that was going to be, we're calling it, very student friendly. And the first thing that we thought would be best for students would be combine the 3rd and 4th quarter. And we did our homework looking at other districts like and unlike us, following the guidelines of DESE. But we felt that combining the 3rd and 4th quarter would be best for our students for no other reason. The least of which the reasons was some students, we left with 3 weeks left in the quarter, and that's when a lot of our students pass in missing work or makeup work, and that's really where you see a jump in a lot of the grades for the students. They lost that opportunity. And they also, initially, when we thought we were coming back May 4th, we were losing the opportunity for the first 3 weeks of the 4th quarter. So we combined the two, and we're extending 1 grade for a combined 3rd and 4th quarter. And it will allow for teachers and students to make up, so to speak, for the work they may have missed that wasn't passed in before a March 12th departure. Again, in line with what Dr. Chase said, we are working with a P for work that was passed in. We did not want to do 0 or no credit. We thought it was kind of harsh and sent a bad message. And the other piece is a lot of high school students, when they see a 0, move on. They think that grade was submitted and they move on. So we are also going with incomplete. Incomplete means a number of things. It wasn't done. There's a little more work to be done. But that student will have the opportunity to pass that incomplete work in through the entirety of the combined 3rd and 4th quarter. So taking into consideration the effects of COVID-19, we do have guidelines for turning in weekly work. The weekly assignments are, the guideline for students is to pass it in by Friday at 4 o'clock. We extend that obviously through the weekend. We have something in place where if students are not logged on and doing work midweek, the teachers are reaching out, and the lens in which we reach out is not a gotcha, a disciplinary lens. It's a lens around what's going on. Has something happened in the home that we don't know about? How can we be of assistance? How can we help? We then allow the student through the weekend. On Mondays at 9 o'clock, the house principals have what we call a student engagement tracker, where the staff can then log on students that they had not connected with and had not passed in any work for the week. At that point, our house principals can support both the staff and student by reaching out to the students, digging deeper to find out the reasons why they didn't turn in any work, and again, through the lens of support and help. At the end of the third and fourth quarter, any incompletes would then be turned into a no credit for final grading. And then we look at based on the amount of work completed and the level of competency that they showed, that's where we would land on a pass or fail grade for the combined in third or fourth quarter. And this next note is important. Any student that's awarded a failing grade or a teacher that anticipates a failing grade, the teacher must reach out to Malden High School administration to assure that we've taken all the steps to reach out to that student, taking into consideration all potential extenuating circumstances why the work wasn't done. And then ultimately the final call on that grade will fall on me, will fall on the principal of the high school. The grade from the combined third, fourth quarter will be calculated with the grades from quarters 1 and quarters 2, as well as the mid-year exam to determine our final grade for the school year. There will be no grade in final exams this year. There may be some assessments that staff put forth to the students just to get a gauge of what happened during or what they picked up during remote learning, but that's not going to count as a grade. So this forced us to change our calculations on our final grades for the year. We've always done it in a format of 20% for each quarter, and then 10% for the mid-year grade and 10% for the final grade. Obviously, we don't have the 4 quarters anymore, and we don't have a final exam. So we've changed the configuration to 30% for the first quarter grade, 30% for the second quarter grade, 10% for the mid-year, and for the combined third and fourth quarter, it's also 30%. Now, keep in mind, if a student gets a passing grade or a P for the combined third, fourth quarter, that will be calculated in as a 100. If they get a fail, it will be calculated in as a 59, which is the highest possible grade a student, highest possible failing grade a student can get. So this, again, in the lens of student friendly, is really going to help out those students that were on the fence or maybe even below the fence in the first and second quarter. And then even in the third quarter, if they logged on with remote learning and with doing their work, they'll get that passing grade, and factoring in 30% of 100 is really going to help that student that's on the fence, or like I said, even below the fence. The student's GPA is going to be calculated from the grades received during the quarter 1 and quarter 2. I'm going to shift to Ms. Craven on this one so she can really dive into the specifics around the GPA and how it's going to appear on the transcript, because we had to also make some changes in our normal procedures around that. So I'm going to pass this off to Ms. Craven for this piece.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mastrangelo. Yeah, just in keeping with what Mr. Mastrangelo said, our goals are to do the most benefit for the most students however possible. And in keeping in mind with that, both on a national level and a state level, we want to keep our students competitive as they leave high school and as they're going on to post-secondary education, whatever form that may take. So in looking at grade point average, looking at what other cities and towns are doing, looking at what the state's accepting and what colleges are saying nationally and statewide, we will have for this school year, quarters 1 and quarter 2 grades will show on the report cards, because that's the data that's going to be in their overall GPA for the remainder of their time in high school. There will be a caveat note on the transcript and on our school profile for the following 3 years, which is in keeping with what most schools in Massachusetts are doing, stating it's COVID-19 was the 1920 school year, had an impact from March through the end of the school year. So if a student requests their transcript 20 years from now, it will still be clear based on the evidence in front of them what their GPA is represented by, the data in place. And it's also in keeping with what universities and colleges and other high schools are doing in terms of utilizing still the time we were in school for the year, keeping that as valuable evidence of grade point average and of your ability to do well in school. And colleges have been recalculating students' grade point averages for decades. Every city and town does it a little differently. So they've always, as they like to say, take apples to oranges to pears, and they make it all apples to apples. So they're going to continue to do that, and they've assured all the school counselors in Massachusetts I'm most familiar with, but across the country, that they will be accepting both this year and going forward passes and fails as opposed to number grades as final grades. They will be looking for meeting graduation requirements, and they will be looking for credits earned, as well as looking to just understand where our GPA came from. And then they'll recalculate based on their own scales so that they're comparing students equally going forward over the next 3 years. So they've taken this strongly into consideration, and cities and towns have done the same. And we're very much in line with what other cities and towns are doing. If anything, we've erred on the side of having more kids do better based on the numbers that Mr. Mastrangelo and his team came up with.
Okay, great.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't say Miss Craven from day one. I mean, we went home on March 12th. On March 13th, she was already reaching out to colleges as well as her guidance staff to assure that our students would not be hurt if and the alignment that we were going to go forward with was going to be equitable for our students with other districts around, not just the state, not just our surrounding towns, but across the country. And she's been on it from day one, and we're lucky. I appreciate that. We're lucky that we have her doing that, and the entire guidance staff at the high school. The one last piece about the grading at the high school is around seniors that were in danger of not graduating. That work had already been done. To be honest, we started that work at the end of the first quarter, like we always do. We always start working on that at the end of the first quarter. We had put some formal steps in place at the end of second quarter. At the end of the second quarter, we were facing mostly on math, because to be totally honest with you, math and English are the ones that keep most of our kids off. So we started identifying our students, and we started credit recovery options for our students at the end of the second quarter, and we were circling back again into the third quarter. As soon as we went on a hiatus, house principals and guidance counselors started identifying students that may be below passing in ELA, and we took the same measures in English ELA as well. And then obviously we went to all the other students individually to see where they were, to create a plan that best suited them, to give them the best opportunity to graduate on time. One added note that's not a bullet here, with the potential early August graduation, fingers crossed for that, that would line up with what is traditionally our summer school graduation. So that would allow any student that needed more time, more credit recovery to get earn the credits, to then be part of our big graduation ceremony that we have every year. And we have a wonderful summer school ceremony, but this would combine the two based on the timing that we put forward on the graduation ceremony. So that is, those are the steps we've taken at the high school. I'm sure there may be some questions at some point. We'll be here to answer those if need be.
Yep, thank you very much. First, Superintendent, you done with your report?
I'm not done, but I can condense this quickly if you'd like.
Could you, please?
Sure.
Hold on, and we'll come to you right after the superintendent concludes his report.
Just an update on Eureka Math. The district is currently using My Math by McGraw-Hill. Has been doing so for the last 4 years. Our contract with them was up, and each year we continue with the program. We need to pay for consumable materials and online access. This expense is incorporated into the operating budget. It's very typical of any textbook company, as much of our learning has gone to an online format. Essentially, you invest in a textbook, you also invest in the consumable materials and online access. Knowing that the contract is a yearly renewal, our director of STEM, Dr. Douglas Dias, worked with the coaches to examine My Math in relation to other more current materials that are more rigorous and more closely aligned to the state standards. Their study led to Eureka Math, which was piloted by 22 teachers in grades K to 5 this year to rave reviews. Right before the closure, Dr. Dias had set up a training with all K-5 teachers to explore the program. We're looking to expand this pilot, knowing that we must balance our need to increase access and rigor with the sensitivity to teachers and students as they re-enter the world of school. We'll be having discussions in the coming weeks to see what the budget allows, get feedback from stakeholders, and carve out a plan moving forward. I think you have a timeline in your packet. I won't read that on what we've done week by week on the coronavirus.
Mm-hmm.
sorry, did somebody say something?
No, we have it.
Okay. Just an ongoing message that I've been trying to get out with the central office through a variety of platforms. During this pandemic, we know that there's been a number of families that have fallen on very hard times, losing their jobs. Currently, right now in America, 1 out of every 6 adults is unemployed. We know that that has an impact on food security. We've been trying to push out through ConnectEd and Twitter for our families to apply for DTA benefits and become eligible for SNAP. We're working with our state delegations as some of these programs become more easily accessible. We'll continue to push that out as well. Kindergarten registration, since the Parent Information Center is physically closed, we've been able to adjust, and we will be putting our kindergarten registration online this week through the great work of PIC manager Joan Federico and Kenny Tron, our database analyst. We've developed a Google form to do the kindergarten registration online. We analyzed a number of options the past few weeks, including using our current database and information systems provider, Aspen. The earliest they could provide a form to be incorporated into the system was at least 6 weeks, and there was a significant cost associated with this option. We spoke with other providers in other districts, what they've used, and there was no way any provider could turn this around in any sort of a timely manner. Kenny was able to create a Google Forms which captures all the data required for families to register. We're in the process of translating that into, I think, 5 languages now. There is a way you could translate it on the website. You'd have to have a little bit of savvy. It's a little too dense to put out there, but you could essentially translate it into any number of languages, but it does take a great deal of skill. I don't want to get into it now, but we will have it available in multiple languages. The details on how to register are in your packet, as you probably are aware. One caveat to this Google form is the parent or guardian would need to establish a Google account or Gmail account in order to proceed. Takes about a minute or 2 to do if you don't have one, but it will enable you to do this. To register online, the child's birth certificate, immunization, current physical, proof of address, and photo ID of the parent and guardian. That's required. These documents can be uploaded to the website or emailed directly to Joan Federico at jfederico@maldenps.org, and all that is explained. The district visioning team and school improvement plans. We had our last visioning meeting on March 12th with the administrative team. Dr. Likas is synthesizing the material input. Essentially, it is done. We're just working with the team on some outcomes, but we hope to have this done in the next month or so. As you can presume and you've heard, I think from Dr. Chase, our focus has been really on getting what I have called centuries of education and pivoting it in 6 weeks to an online format. It's taken up all of our time. It's changed weekly and daily in some instances. That has been our focus, but once we get a little more calm, we'll be proceeding with this. In the midst of the crisis and given the outcomes that lay ahead, I've directed our principals to use the draft version of the district improvement plan as a guide for a 2-page overview of a school improvement plan. Part of what we hope to do with the district improvement plan is then mirror and cascade down our individual school improvement plans. So it's one cohesive message built on the same foundation and principles. Homeless transportation of our homeless students in Malden going to Malden schools. They're housed in Malden. On December 9th, the school committee adopted the revised homeless students transportation policy that states that, among other things, that homeless students within the district will receive comparable transportation as other students in the district. This will take effect starting July 1st, and I'll be preparing a letter shortly to go out to those families that will be affected by this change. September 14th, right now that's proposed to be a state holiday for this year for the rescheduled running of the Boston Marathon. I don't believe it has been signed into law yet, but if it is, we will have to adjust our school calendar to take into account for that as the Monday in September. We will have to adjust our school calendar, but I will keep you appraised of that. It will be a 1-day adjustment. As of now, for the summer and reopening of schools, there are not any certain plans for the status of summer school. It's really it's a wait and hold based on our local and state restrictions, as well as guidance from the Department of Ed. They are working on some guidelines along the reopening as well. They're looking at multitude of possibilities. Over the next couple weeks, I will be convening a reentry task force or committee, and we will keep you posted on that as that comes along. I think that in whatever plan we're choosing, safety has to be the paramount value and belief in which we can safely bring our students and staff back in. We don't know what will be entailed of this from the state guidelines or even local, whether it will be mandated temperature checks, antibody testing, in the absence of a vaccine, what other protocols and safety procedures will be in place. But we will be convening some sort of a reentry task force and going forward with that over the next couple weeks. Today begins Teacher or Educator Appreciation Week. This has never been an easy job, and these past few weeks have posed incredible challenges for our educators here in the Malden Public Schools. Our teachers' work matters more in our students' lives today than ever before. I am very honored and humbled to be a part of a district where our educators give their best every single day, going above and beyond to give the powerful gift of an excellent education to our students and to every student in the district. I think the one refrain we've heard over and over from our educators is how much they miss our kids. I think the videos, some of the parades that have gone on have been incredibly touching for our staff. And we hope to continue to reach out and support our students and families in every single way we can. But I want to just take this moment to salute our educational staff to kick off Educator Appreciation Week. You have my undying respect. I've never seen a group of educators work as hard or as collaboratively and with such dedication and professionalism as the educators here in Malden. Can't say enough good things about you guys. You've been wonderful. Month of May is Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, and this month holds the additional significance to members in the community as we celebrate this. With the advent of the COVID-19, we've seen the very best of humanity shining through the world. We've also seen some of its worst, unfortunately. Our Asian American and Pacific American neighbors have faced bias, bigotry, and hatred in this country because of their culture and ethnicity. It's important to recognize the overwhelming challenges being faced by people of all people of color, being disproportionately affected by this pandemic. With the extraordinary circumstances under which we're working this year, please continue to provide, we will continue to provide the support you've been accustomed to for our students and families, particularly our families of color. And May 1st, Friday, was a dual day here. One, it was Principals Appreciation Day, Recognition Day. Our 7 principals have been incredible beacons of light during what I would call a very dark period here in our present history. They've been wonderful. Very blessed to have such a great principal team here. They work nonstop. I call them at all hours, text them. I apologize for it. I've never heard any one of them come back with, please don't do this. They've really loved their jobs, but more importantly, they love the school, the kids, and the community. Also on Friday, May 1st, rather, was School Lunch Hero Day. And we certainly have our lunch heroes here in Malden. They've been out there every single Monday through Friday since March 16th. They've served meals, rain, snow, sleet, wind, and even when the scorching heat will be coming along. They've been doing it, and we just want to thank them for their selflessness and their never-ending work, which is really targeted to supporting our students. They're an integral part of keeping our students healthy and safe. And thank you very much to our lunch heroes in our cafeterias. And then just lastly, I'd just like to thank all of our Malden Public School employees and educators here. Although physically distant, they're socially and emotionally present in our students' and families' lives. Our staff have been working diligently in coordinating efforts behind the scenes, as well as reaching out to students and families. Everyone has helped step up. Our food service providers have been rock solid angels. We have many people like Natalia Brennan and her crew who continue to go above and beyond with coordinating the next round of Chromebook distributions, which is an incredible task. Our business office continues to keep our operational and support staff up and running. They do a tremendous job coordinating all the school committee related communications and activity. Shirley Dore has been just wonderful working with a variety of media and coordinating between members and the administration. On behalf of the City of Malden, Malden Public Schools, I want to salute and thank and honor all that you are doing. And this concludes my report for tonight, Mr. Chairperson.
All right, thank you very much, Superintendent. I thought it only appropriate that we hear from Ms. Chewicki, our student representative, because a lot of what was said impacts her and her classmates. So is there any questions that you have or thoughts or impressions upon what was reported tonight?
No, I actually think it's really great, and I'm grateful to be able to like still have a graduation, prom, and have all the information like be clear for my future, like transcripts and GPA wise, because I know a lot of schools cancel their graduation like and proms. So I'm just really grateful that I'm still able. There's a chance for that I'll be able to have that. Thank
Okay,
you.
great. So that's the feedback you're getting too from your colleagues? They're all pretty happy with
It's the best it's the best that can be done because everyone's sacrificing a lot, and that's the best we can do. You guys can do. Thank you.
That's why we describe your class as resilient. All right, let's open it up to questions now. Questions of the superintendent or the administration. Let's start with Ms. Spatafora.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bear with me. I have a few questions.
All right.
So we talked about hotspots, and we have 91 students without. What's the cost associated with that, Superintendent?
So don't quote me, but I think we got a deal in the low 60s, $62 a spot, but it was a discount that we got through one of the providers.
And is that something that we'll be able to put through the CARES Act if that works out for us? I mean, I feel like that's something that we could utilize.
Potentially it could be, yep. I know that's one of the kind of bigger picture items that they are saying, like access.
Absolutely.
There also may be opportunities through the state, through other programs that we can get funding for technology. But right now we took the money and bought these because it's necessary right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Chromebooks. So how many do we actually have left? If I know we're saying this is last call. However, things arise. What do we have for numbers of available Chromebooks between now and the end of the year? If something comes up and someone says, I missed it, do we have the ability to accommodate?
Well, hopefully, with the window of a week to register and, the call going out, hopefully we're going to capture all of them. I don't know the exact number we have left because some of them, we rotate them back in, and when the seniors graduate, those go into carts.
Mm-hmm.
I think what happens right now is the Chromebooks that we have remaining would need to be almost assessed individually. They're also older. These not the ones that are going out. This is like if beyond the 500.
Yeah.
And I'm not speaking with certainty, so I'll get you the answer. But those Chromebooks need to be formatted individually. Their capacity and processing speed is significantly slower. The ones that we have distributed right now were part of the purchase of the replenishment. And what has made this a lot quicker and easier is that they can be formatted remotely and in mass. The other ones will be a much more labor-intensive process. which is very time consuming. So we're hoping we get remaining people right now, because, we only have a short amount of time left until June 19th.
So Ms. Spatafor, you want to go one more and then we'll swing around and come back?
Okay, one more question then.
Then we'll come back.
Sure. We talked a lot about graduation, senior activities. I never once heard anything about our Pathways program.
Sue or Principal Mastrangelo?
I'm not sure what the question is.
About the Pathways
our
graduation.
Pathways program. So the graduation, we always have a graduation for our Pathways students, and I didn't hear anything brought up about that particular program.
Principal?
We always have, there's a Pathways ceremony that's separate, but our Pathways graduates also graduate on the field at the graduation ceremony.
Yep.
So, depending on what kind of restrictions we have, the problem with the Pathways ceremony, which is a wonderful ceremony, is it's restricted. It's in a restricted area. It's a smaller amount of people. It's generally held inside, and the problem we're having around being in compliance with some of the mandates that are coming forward is these programs, such as National Honor Society, such as scholarship, that are too small per se, or really wouldn't work in an outside venue. We don't have a venue inside where we can accommodate the requirements. We're not saying no to anything. We're looking into every possibility. In this situation, we may have to just fold the Pathway ceremony into the greater graduation ceremony, and then maybe look to do something on the back end, a lot like the senior cookout. But we're trying to give everything we can to the kids and give them the special time and the families that they deserve, but at the same time being in compliance with what we're getting from both this local, state, and federal levels.
Okay, I implore you to work really hard on that one, just because of Pathway students, there's a reason why we do a smaller ceremony. It's for maybe mental health reasons. It's smaller, compressed, anxiety, whatnot. And I just really hope that we put our best foot forward to make sure that there's something specific.
I can guarantee you that if we can make it happen, we're going to. That's my approach to everything on this. If we can make it happen, we're going to. Every ceremony at the end of the year is special in its own way.
Absolutely.
We're trying to do it with fidelity and keep that lens and that focus around giving these students this special time that they've worked so hard to get.
All right, thank you, Ms. Spatafor. And we'll come back to you. I just want to give other people a chance to ask a few questions.
Absolutely.
So other members, questions, Mr. Weldai.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I'm similar to Ms. Spatafor. I've got a list, so tell me what.
Let's go 3 of them, and then we'll open it up, see if anybody else, and then we'll come back to you. Okay.
Got it.
All right.
I guess to piggyback off of her initial questions, in terms of the Chromebooks, did we? And I know initially we were saying we were prioritizing the families who were getting the first device versus families who need additional devices. But did we actually turn down anybody who needed an additional device?
So in this run, we haven't turned anybody down.
Oh, that's great. All right, that's great to know. I was wondering from the way that you worded it whether or not we had to turn down anybody who needed the second device.
I'm sorry.
In terms of the,
I'm sorry. We may have in the first distribution.
Yeah.
I think we did have people who said, I've got one, but we made the first one those who had nothing. On this one, I don't believe we turned anybody down. That's correct.
That's awesome. That's why I was thinking a lot of those first round folks were trying again. And I was wondering whether or not we let them through, which is fantastic. In terms of the hotspots, is there a monthly cost that's associated with them too to maintain, or is it just a one-time, we bought it, it's good to go?
So
I'd have to check into that. I think it's you buy the hotspot and it has a it might have an annual fee, but I don't think it's a prohibited. I'll check in on that. I don't know.
Thank you. And I guess the last one with tech stuff is in terms of the hotspots, again, we had 91 who were requesting internet access. Did we buy enough hotspots that we can cover all of them and then hopefully some more just in case?
Yes, we did. We've purchased enough for them. We also just, we had 100 out there for the high school. That's been since we went with the one-to-one a couple of years ago. So you know, we know now we'll have hopefully 200 out there, correct?
That's fantastic. I was back and forthing with Dr. Chase and you and Natalia Brennan the other day, and I think Dr. Chase and I could compete for who's the biggest member of the Natalia Brennan fan club. But even the way that they did round 2, I think is just so impressive. And you know, even the delivery with Malden Neighbors Helping Neighbors. But thank you for getting all that done.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weldai. Other questions? Mr. Gray.
Just a quick note to add to what Adam and Jenna said, specifically concerning hotspots purchased under educational contracts. I happen to know from experience in the past that they tend to be completely different than anything we know about commercial hotspots that you can pick up as a consumer. They tend to be a flat rate. They generally tend to be unlimited usage. And they're a lot more open-ended because they're a special category specifically for educational use. So the students shouldn't have any paperwork, anything to worry about. They should be self-contained and they should just work.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gray. Other members? Ms. Luong?
Hi. Okay, so you guys already answered all my Chromebook questions and my hotspot questions.
Okay.
So we'll move on to the dyslexia screening.
All right.
If that's, I have a bunch of questions, so I'll give you my top 3.
Okay.
The first one being, what's the schedule that we're planning on doing per year for the screenings for the K through, at least the K through 2? Are we just going to screen once, and that's, you know, once in the beginning of the year, and see, is it 3 or 4 times during the year? I wasn't sure if you've gotten to that point yet.
If I could ask Assistant Superintendent Wood to give the specifics on that, I think he's better versed at this.
Sure. So right now what we do is we do everybody at the beginning of the year, and then we progress monitor below a certain level. We haven't created the cut score for that, and then we do an end of the year for everybody. And we'll continue that.
Okay. And was that within the guidelines by DESE? Just because in reading different people's takes on this, they said, you know, one of the guidelines was 3 or 4 times a year. Is there a reason why we're not doing it as often, or we just really haven't had the complete plan worked out yet?
Well, the progress monitoring is what will meet the DESE guidelines, because those would be the kids that we would have the concern for the dyslexia, and then the beginning and ending of the year will be so that we don't miss anybody through that. And if anybody moves in, we would continue, start them whenever they arrive.
Okay, and my next question is that we do have a plan to include the ESL students as well, correct?
Correct, everybody's included.
Great. And my last question is when you mentioned DIBELS 8, what criteria was used for deciding on what screening tool we were going to use?
So it was a matter of quality and expediency, since we had been already using DIBELS and we didn't have to do that much training on the new DIBELS, and there was a sense of quality with the DIBELS exam, and it rated high on a chart that we used to look at all of the different tools that are out there. It was I believe either number 2 on the tools that the US ED was rating. And so that's why we went with that one.
Okay.
All right.
I believe it was also recommended by DESE as one of the...
it's on their list.
Right. It was highly recommended by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Luong. Let's take some other questions if there are any. Let me see, just if I might from the chair. Superintendent, what were your thoughts on the remote learning plan survey? What were your overall thoughts after reviewing the results?
I think we had a lot of very positive comments that were sprinkled throughout there, that they know everybody's working hard. I think that Dr. Chase, in talking about the remote learning and the grading, I think really touched on it. There are probably 67 different remote learning plans that would work. Not everybody is the same. I think we found a third of the people it's working well. A third it's too much, it's too hard, and a third it's just right. It's too much, too little, or it's just right. It really kind of broke down into those gradations. I think that we've used this, consistent with some of the feedback we're getting. It's a very challenging time. I think people are at home trying to work if they are fortunate enough to still have a job, and then trying to become the educator at home. And it's not what we were doing 6 weeks ago, and now we are. So I was very pleased with many of the comments that I think singled out our connectivity with our families. I think that's been one of the hallmarks that has made this successful. I was on a call with another, I'm on a task force through the House of Representatives on social emotional abuse and neglect. And I was on with several people who have noted their own kids have yet to be contacted by their teachers. And this is in what many would call more affluent districts. I think we've really set the bar high. We have, people at a minimum, they're checking in once a week, and we know most of them are checking in more. Some are checking in on weekends. I think when I saluted our educators here, they go above and beyond. And I think that came through in the survey results. I think that, people across the country are feeling, there's commercials that incorporate how hard it is to work and balance the family and teaching. It's not going to work for everybody. Our own educators are struggling, like everybody else, with educating their children and, dealing with the threat and the fear that's out there. I mean, this is a very scary time. We've had several educators who have lost parents during this time, and that has an emotional toll. And I think that their colleagues have stepped up to support. Their principals have been wonderful in leading that and stepping in seamlessly in the absence of them while they've had to deal with the crisis that's in front of them.
Okay, building on what Ms. Luong said, dyslexia kindergarten testing rollout, why now? Why didn't we do this like last year or 2 years ago or 5 years ago? What's prompted this now?
It's a requirement by the state.
That's a new requirement?
Correct.
Got it. And then finally, I want to bump down to Ms. Craven, the principal, in Ms. Chase. And I'm looking at Ms. Chewicki when I asked this. So again, the high school students, anything prior to March 12th does not have to be made up. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Mayor. Any outstanding work that prior to March 12th has been taken off the board.
Third and fourth are combined quarters, right? Are they called quarters or terms?
Third and fourth quarters, some called terms, but we've combined the third and fourth quarter.
And it's complete, incomplete, and then at the end it's pass, fail?
So it's pass if you've passed, like Dr. Chase spoke, if you pass the work in during the remote learning, it goes in P as passed in. If you did not, it goes in as incomplete. I was in love with the phrase "not yet," but that really wasn't compatible with our format, so we changed to incomplete, which is, they're one and the same. But the students know that they have the entirety of the third and fourth combined quarter to get that work in. If we get to the end of the marking period and they haven't passed it in after all our attempts to engage, that would then be shifted to a no credit, just so they could then calculate the grade for the third and fourth quarter.
So let's say that happens. What happens then? Do they have to repeat or come back or do it over the summer?
So then you're talking if they fail for the third and fourth quarter
Yeah.
overall. So if, for a student to fail at the end of the third and fourth quarter, we're on that in real time as we see students that are getting incompletes. And I have to really commend my house principals at the high school. They've been incredible. They've taken initiative as far as engagement opportunities with students and staff and families. They've really been amazing, the work they've put in around outreach to students. So we're working with those students in real time. And then if we get to that point at the end of the quarter, we're really looking into what potential extenuating circumstances were in place to keep that student from getting the work in. And then from there, we even have put in place a system in which the teacher that knows the student and knows the student's skills can advocate for the student's passing grade at the end. So we really put a lot of steps in place to assure that the students have an equal opportunity to pass that class.
Okay, very good. Let's take some other questions. Any other questions of the members? Otherwise, we're going to move on to subcommittee reports. Ms. Spatafor, and then we'll go to Ms. Luong.
Thank you. And I'm going to make this really quick so we can keep moving. What are our connection stats on reaching out to students to make sure that they are, and I guess this may be specifically to Ms. Craven, we've talked about reaching out to students, making sure that they're engaged, they're online from a social emotional standpoint. Have we reached out to every single student that may not have been on their Google Meet or whatnot? Have we checked in with every student to make sure that they are, emotionally okay?
So that is something, and Mr. O'Terry and Mr. Mastrangelo know better than I. Every school, pre-K through 12, has an engagement tracking system to track every single student. And what's been happening is if a student is not engaged directly with a teacher on a regular basis, the counseling team, both the social workers, the guidance people, the school psychs, the speech pathologists, everyone has been, along with the principals, calling each one of those students. And we've been using actually third-party translation on the phone because a lot of the students who maybe aren't engaged, there's a language deficit. I would also give a shout out to the EL teachers K through 12 who have been tirelessly trying to communicate with all of their students. So I think we really have been, I think at the high school, the statistics were 1% if you do the math on who has had no contact.
Wow.
So it really has been priority. And when we check in with them, it's not, did you do your work? That has come right from the top. Superintendent O'Terry's word to everybody is, are you okay? And how are you? And then secondary is, how the academic piece?
Perfect.
I think our connection rate has been remarkable. When I shared that with others, I can just, as of last week, and I don't have the updated stats, I think at the Salemwood, I think they've been unable to reach only 9 students out of 1,100. That's
wow.
No,
really
they got them. They got them this week.
And they got them this week. So
Yep.
There you go. That's really been great. I was, like I said, this afternoon, I was on a conference call with a couple of people from the House of Representatives and 3 or 4 other folks. And when I mentioned that, they were blown away. And that was with the bad stats. That was 9 out of the 1,100. So, we're really, we've done a great job with that. I've worked with Ms. Craven too. We've even incorporated into this, a heightened sense of awareness for families that are under stress. There may be signs of abuse and neglect. We're really on this in a comprehensive way because it is so important. People are stressed. People are trapped at home, literally. And, we know that this is going to have a major impact. And when we do re-enter, we know that the social emotional support, a PTSD type of approach is going to have to be incorporated in order to make this a smooth transition. And we need to update our staff's toolkit too, because this is going to be something that we're all going to own. This is a new chapter in our lives academically, to be sure, but more important from the social emotional standpoint.
Yep.
Thank you, Ms. Do you have another question? Yep.
One more question, and I'll save my rest of the questions for emails then. So I know, and I'm going to ask this question as a parent, more than school committee member, and Mr. Angelo kind of touched upon it a bit when we talked about work being given on Mondays. We have until Friday to complete it. But even then, so as parents, some of us are working from home. We're using up the internet bandwidth. Kids can't get on. So when we're looking at our pass incomplete or whatnot, rather than, because I know, for instance, we can't get everything done during the week. Kids are going into the weekend doing work. Can we look at this at more of an end of we've kind of created a new combined quarter, but say 130 assignments are given, let's take half of those were passed in, rather than looking at what's being sent in every week. It's really a cumulative look at what's being done. Because realistically, a lot of these kids can't even get on during the week. A lot of these, parents are working. They don't have maybe all the help they can get. There's only one or two, tablets, laptops, whatever at home. So the expectation of having work being turned in on a Friday, or I know we did say we could go into the weekend, but really looking at it at an end of the quarter, end of the year perception.
That's what we're doing at the high school, Ms. Pettifora. Again, that's why we're giving the incomplete, and knowing that student can pass that in. And then we're looking at the full body of work when we get to the end of the year. So I think one of the things that would be a little concerning, or maybe even intimidating to some of our students and our staff, quite frankly, would be just put it out there and put it all look at it all at the end. That's why we're giving weekly smaller benchmarks, breaking it up weekly, and knowing full well that the student doesn't complete it, that they can then continue to complete it. And then the other piece is, making sure that the completion level is to the level that the teacher is satisfied by their grasp of the material that was put out. All those things are taken into consideration. The lens in which we're looking through is, and I think Ms. Craven spoke upon it. I agree. It's right from the top from Superintendent O'Terry. We're never calling a kid and saying, "Why didn't you?" We're calling a kid and saying, "How can we help you?" And if helping them means we have to eliminate some of that, we do. We're looking through a complete support, student-friendly lens with our grading system and our outreach. Again, from our house principals to our guidance to our SACs and so forth. It's our number one priority is how can we help, and we're in that lens with the families as well.
And I think it's, we've crafted this plan with, flexibility in mind. I know that our other, pre-K to 8 principals are also very cognizant of this. We don't want families stressing out about this with the push and the time frame. I think that, talk with your teachers, principals. We'll work with families so that this is less stressful. There's enough stress out there right now. We certainly don't want the stress of a timeline driven that really, where we know families are up against it. There's limited device, there's limited bandwidth. There's a lot of limits out there. We certainly don't want to put that additional stress on families. So we're really cognizant of that, and we'll work with everybody. So I want to really allay anybody's fears on that going forward. I think that it goes hand in glove with the social emotional. That's the plan. I had a couple educators that teach in other districts reach out to us when we first launched the remote learning plan, and the responses were, "Thank you for drafting a plan that really captured the essence in getting the social emotional part down as the primary ingredient." And I think that that's something that all of our staff is aware of. This is not meant to be something that places additional stress and burdens on everybody. And frankly, the commission has been very strident on that too. I think, really has made sure that we're doing what we can to support our students and families. This is not the regular school. It's not. We've made every effort and every opportunity we can to say it's not. So we need to be flexible and accepting, and we'll work with everybody.
All right.
If I may just let's continue that that communication out to parents. Just because, you know, I know our teachers, our educators are aware, but let's just make sure that our parents are aware that it's okay that, you know, not everything always gets done right when it gets sent out.
All right, thank you, Ms. Spatafora. Ms. Luong.
Yes, one of the things, you know, piggybacking off that a bit, is that, you know, I've heard from parents, you know, the remote learning, that they're getting used to it. You know, we have working parents and whatnot. What I am hearing is a lot of fear for parents with kids with special needs, because they're not feeling like they know exactly what services are being offered and what aren't. They're very concerned that I have some families that aren't receiving any services, or they've just started to receive services, I should say. One family, one child was receiving services and the son never received anything until last week. So there's just been a bit of inconsistency. But with that said, I do want to compliment the teachers and everybody's hard work. I see the effort. I appreciate the effort as a parent and as a school committee person. Nothing's perfect. I just would love to see how are we going to address the educational gaps for some of these special ed students that are not able to at home grasp the concepts of what's going on remotely. And their parents' fear is that they're falling further behind. So what kind of plan can we put in place? What can we do to maybe explain what the N1 forms are that they receive? Some receive them, you know, one person received them I talked to on the first week in April, and one just received them last week. So I just think there's some of those inconsistencies, and if we could talk to that a bit, I'd appreciate that.
So,
Sorry. We're working on the communication part of that so that families will be brought more into the loop. I know that Assistant Superintendent Wood and our Malden Education Association were putting together frequently asked questions that will be coming out in the next day or two. We're hopeful that will probably address many of these things going forward, so families will be, on the same page.
Okay. All right, we're going to move forward.
Mr. Chair, I had a few from the first round. Can I ask them?
Please.
Thank you. I guess just to push a little bit with what Michelle said, I don't know if that really answered her question. I guess I'm more wondering what services are not being able to be delivered to kids now, and why. And then to sort of touch on that, Dr. Chase had sort of mentioned in the grading piece that there was a SPED piece that was going to be addressed, and I wanted to know whether or not that was coming from here during this portion.
Soup.
Sure. I think specifically, Mr. Wood can give us the list. I know that physical therapy is one that's very difficult. We can use, if the parent is part of this, we can deliver some of that remotely, but often because of a number of, frankly, safety issues sometimes, it can't be, but I think Mr. Wood can probably address that more specifically than I.
Mr. Wood?
Sure. So we followed the DESE guidelines at the start of this, and we sent out N1s to all of our parents. I understand, the mail being what it is, some of our emails may not have been accurate or have them at all. So the lateness may have been due to that. But our next iteration, again, following DESE guidelines, is we're sending something more specific. That's a student remote plan that will really focus on the goal and the objectives for the student and articulate very specifically what services they will be getting. Because of resources and resource allocation, we're emphasizing, we initially were trying to do related services in Google Classrooms. And now that we are where we are, we're going to be pulling out students to do small groups. Now that we have teletherapy for speech and language was an issue for their professional licensure. It's a bit of an issue for our BCBAs as well, because they technically can't provide services in an environment that they have not physically seen or been a part of. So we're working through those. We meet with our BCBAs in these groups each week to kind of go through them individually with each caseload. So we're we're now, with that new plan going out, and that'll be going out toward the end of this week, students will start getting small group services for speech and language, OT, to the extent that we can provide.
Nice, thank you. Speech was one in particular that I was curious about, so thank you for addressing that one.
I just want to answer the reference that Dr. Chase gave. That was to preschool, and I put a blurb in there just to assure parents that we will be doing a preschool progress report because we are for special needs students, and so they will be getting those.
Awesome. And in terms of the dyslexia screenings, I know it's been asked, but just to clarify, is that happening just for kindergartners, or is that going to happen to every kid K through 8?
Every student K through 8.
Oh, that's phenomenal. I thank you. I will follow Ms. Spatafora's lead and save a lot of the questions I've got for email, but I think just a really big props to Principal Mr. Angelo, Director Craven. I think the extraordinary amount of thought that went into planning the end of year activities, the grading system, Dr. Chase. It's leaps and bounds, I feel like, above what I'm seeing happen in districts around us from all that we've been reading and all that we've been seeing, and the amount of just the fact that you were this proactive is very cool, and I think we all owe you a debt of gratitude for that. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Weldai. Anybody else? I don't see any other lights, so thank you all. We're now going to move on to our next item, subcommittee reports and discussions. First up, Space and Enrollment Ad-Hoc Subcommittee. Mr. Iovino.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The current enrollment in the Malden Public Schools is 6,703. Since September, we have picked up 68 students. We are approximately 26 fewer than last year, and that gap is closing significantly. In terms of kindergarten registration, I did check with Mrs. Federico. She normally sends out approximately 450 to 500 applications each year. Currently, she has completed returns 135.
Okay, thank you. Any questions of Mr. Iovino? If none, we're going to drop down to Mr. Weldai. Equity and Opportunity Subcommittee, 2 items underneath: kindergarten registration, internet access inventory, and future planning. Mr. Weldai.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So piggybacking right off of what Mr. Iovino just said, the superintendent already addressed this in his report, but the kindergarten registration, and Mr. O'Terry, correct me if I'm wrong, goes live tomorrow.
Superintendent?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yep,
And it's going to be right in the...
I'm sorry?
No, go ahead.
I will be putting that out tomorrow. I'm just going to make sure that we're ready to go live, but it will be tomorrow, Wednesday at the latest.
No, that's great. And people can find it right on the maldenps.org.
Yes. Yeah,
Awesome.
We'll give them the script. Yep.
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Iovino had mentioned, the number is low, the 135 for applications that have been sent in. I know a lot of folks, and we have to appreciate Director Joan Federico. We know a lot of families were holding on to stuff because we told them if they mail it, it's not going to get anywhere anyway. It's going to be held in the post office, or you don't want it to get lost. If folks have not mailed in anything, should they, instead of going to the post office and putting that in tomorrow, you prefer they complete the online registration form?
That's really Miss Federico's call. We're now getting the mail. She's coming in, custodian's holding it. So it's whatever is probably easier for the family.
Just the fact that we're getting it and it's not being held in the post office, that's probably
it is
better situation than what we had before. All right, so that completes kindergarten registration report.
Let's hold there, see if there's any questions of the members. Mr. Spatafora.
Thank you. It probably really doesn't pertain to kindergarten registration, but more or less registration in general. So if we have a new student, Mr. Weldai, that's coming into the district right now, are we encouraging them to go online to register as well? Or are we asking them to hold off until we have a better grasp on the situation at hand? And I don't know if this may be a question actually more so for Superintendent O'Terry.
Superintendent?
So we've been accepting students who have transferred in. I think we've taken in about 7 since the pandemic. That was a directive from the Department of Education. A little contrary to what I thought, since the entire state's on remote learning plan, to me, it would have made sense to continue with the families, to continue with the school district that knows your family and everything else. But we have taken, and Ms. Federico's processed them, and we've placed them into schools.
Okay, so future families moving in over the next 6 weeks or so can contact PIC and be processed as new district students.
Correct.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Is that the same for ELC, right, too? Because they're their own chop shop in terms of registration, aren't they?
The ELC is a separate process, and we'll hopefully have that one up and running shortly as well. Mr. Dolan is working with Mr. Tron on the exact forms. Most of them are the same. There's a couple that are different.
Thank you.
Ms. Luong.
A question, how are we wrapping, for kindergartners coming in, how are we going to wrap the screenings in the summer prior to? Are we going to wait till we're all back to school? How are you going to do some of that testing?
So,
well, it's going to depend on a lot of where we are, the guidelines, obviously, where I hate to keep bringing that up, but until we get some clarity of what we can do in opening up the buildings, we're going to have to continue to sort of wait and see and schedule as we can, as smoothly and as efficiently as we can.
All right, if I might, just from the chair, Superintendent, the registrations reflect the changes that were made by this committee not too long ago, correct?
In terms of which
criteria?
Yes, that was adopted. The policy went into effect, I believe, in March, correct me?
Yeah. And what's the due date? Or is there one?
Due date for?
Submitting registration forms. Is it rolling?
It's rolling.
Yeah, okay. All right, Mr. Weldai, back to you. We're now going to take a look at internet access inventory.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that the superintendent thoroughly covered everything that we had under this topic in his report. Again, just a huge thank you to him, to Tony Mertz, to Natalia Brennan for, I think, being as comprehensive as humanly possible with this. I know a lot of that work falls under the principals and their connectivity with the teachers and families, but I think it seems like we are in a fantastic place. So thank you for all the work you're doing.
All right, thank you, Mr. Weldai. Any questions on that topic? Hearing none. Let's go to motions and resolutions. Remote learning, reentry, and long-term planning. Mr. Weldai.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the superintendent spoke a little bit about this at the outset in his remarks. And I'd thrown this on the agenda last week because the more and more we think about it, I mean, the reality is that the process of returning to school in whatever form we do that is going to be far more impactful on our kids, on our families, on their education, their social, emotional, academic well-being than anything that we're doing right now. And what I was hoping we could get from our superintendent tonight, and I think you're going to elaborate on this a little bit, is what our plans are moving forward. And I know, I was fortunate enough to participate in an MASC Zoom a week or two ago with like 75 school committee members from around the state. And it was pretty clear that a lot of districts are planning for all the different scenarios and the eventualities. And then I saw an article this morning from Haverhill where the superintendent had sort of put out 4 separate plans for this is how we could potentially reenter. And knowing none of this is set in stone, I'm hopeful that we're not going to sort of sit and wait for DESE to give us guidelines, because we can kind of be district specific planning how we want to get back in. You alluded to this, what Mr. Iovino had asked the question at the budget committee meeting as well. But could you maybe speak a little bit to what the process or what your process is going to be getting us ready for that?
Sure. I think we're going to be cognizant of what the state guidelines are in terms of, assemblies and gatherings. Obviously, that's going to be the driving force. If there's still a prohibition of groups of more than 10, come September, that's going to change things drastically. But we will be in the process of assembling a reentry task force that is going to have to, look at possible scenarios. I know that in talking to my colleagues in other districts and even the state, they're looking at multiple scenarios of either, a delayed entry, staggered starts, returning with physical distancing in place still. I think we need to look at a number of these. I think we have to take into account our public health and school health. Those people would be critical on this, as well as I think a number of other stakeholder groups to start talking and looking at certain scenarios. We can't wait for the state to say this is what you're going to do, although they've sort of loosely talked about, developing a plan, but their tendency throughout this whole thing has been to throw it back to local decision, whether it be grading or even from the beginning, until, it took the governor to say that, we're not returning back to school. I think we need to look at what the impact will be. Certainly this will involve negotiations with the teachers union, because this certainly could be, different sessions. We don't know. I think we need to look at, I could probably think off the top of my head of at least 7 or 8 different scenarios. And there's probably another 7 or 8 that I haven't thought of. I think that this is going to be a collaborative effort. I think we're going to need to work with a lot of different groups. I think we have to listen to some of our experts too. I think that, we'll keep in touch with certainly our 5 district partners. I mean, 4 of the 5 of us are very similar in size. We border each other. I've talked with them in loose terms about what a reentry looks like. I think our numbers, with the exception of Chelsea, are similar. Revere, Malden, and Everett have very similar infection rates. Chelsea obviously has the highest rate in the Commonwealth. So we'll be looking at a number of factors on this.
So I guess what I'm really getting at is you mentioned, because you're right, like I could think of 7 or 8, and you're probably right, there's dozens more that we don't know about yet. When do we start that? Like, are we gonna, is it possible to start preface negotiating with the union so that we know, or putting together those what does this look like? Do our classrooms fit this amount of kids? Chris Webb, the mayor, hosts the weekly COVID briefings. I don't know what you would call it, Mr. Mayor. That since we are stuck at home, and they're really great, I watch. But Chris Webb had mentioned sort of a temperature reading device that could be a scanner as kids are walking in the building. So there's all those different sort of scenarios. When do we start gaming that out? And I think, does the process, can it be as inclusive as possible? With a task force is great, but like, is that going to include us? Is that going to include the director of public health, the union president? Like, when do we sort of get those hypotheticals going?
And very shortly, I'd like to, put together a list of who would logically be on that committee. I think we need to look at maybe putting somebody in charge of that. I don't know if that would involve, maybe working with, either a consultant or if it involves, maybe, working, with co-chairs, myself with somebody else that has some expertise in this. But yeah, we'll start putting that panel together. And, I think obviously having MEA representation would be critical, because it will be in many ways a different environment in which we're teaching. There's devices that scan kids as they come in. I don't know if that's, I don't know the costs or anything. There's a lot of things. How expensive is it? How accurate is it? And then what's the protocol if somebody, has a temperature? I think that there's so many different things. We're going to have to spend a lot of time kind of ironing these out, and then start crafting different scenarios. But I do caution, because this does change so quickly. I'd hate to put a lot of effort into it in May and only have this thing upended, very shortly. I think once we get some numbers over the next week or two, I think we'll have a better sense, but, we will put together this group. I'll work with the mayor and the vice chair of, and sketch out sort of a framework with this, and go from there.
If I
All right,
could.
Mr. Iovino.
Yeah, we touched again on this, following up Adam's point at the budget subcommittee meeting earlier today. And we had agreed that it's vitally important for us to begin working on the budget. And Jennifer, Mrs. Spatafora has scheduled a meeting 2 weeks from today. I think once that committee that you're talking about, Superintendent Oteri, is formed, and it is a task force that, from my perspective, I think, Adam, you feel the same way, that we do it ASAP. And if we get derailed, we get derailed. I mean, there are so many permutations of what this September is going to look like, late August and September, that, and the question, of course, is, will we open? The biggest question. But, yeah, sooner the better. And it's something that we should be working in concert with the budget subcommittee also. Thank you.
Mr. Weldai, so we should have this on the agenda for June.
I think that would be great. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I have something assembled by then, and like I said, we'll work, ASAP tomorrow, and starting with a list of potential stakeholders that should be a part of this.
Madam Clerk, so if we can add this item for the June docket, with an update from our superintendent, that'd be great. Just from my vantage point, and I know we've talked about this, Superintendent, at our weekly meetings. I'm hoping this can be more community driven than, having a consultant show us the way. I mean, you would know better than I, but I'm skeptical of needing a consultant. Not only that, skittish on, what that expense might be at this time. So if you could just brief the budget subcommittee before making any decision on that, we would appreciate it.
Certainly.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Weldai. So no action, right, Mr. Weldai? We'll carry that over.
Sounds good, Mr. Chairman.
Let's go to the next item, hourly employees. Advice from DESI, Ms. Spatafora.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the last time we met in April, DESI had advised that from the start of the school closure in March up until the last date was May 4th, that we had pay our hourly employees. It was something that was already budgeted for.
Right.
We voted on, we approved, and again, now DESI has come out with advisement saying that from the last update, May 4th, up until the end of the school year or the closure of school, again, that we continue to pay our hourly employees. Again, it's something that we've already budgeted for. So I'd like to, first I'd like to bring it up for discussion before we make any decisions.
All right, well, why don't we first do this, Ms. Spatafora? Let's get it up on the table. So you're making a motion to do that.
Yes.
Second.
Seconded by, who was that?
Mr. Iovino.
Mr. Iovino. All right, so it's properly before us. Let's take any questions on it. Everybody's clear? I think because we did this last month.
Mm-hmm.
Superintendent, you want to add to it?
If I could, just for clarification, I think it would, the continuation of the group that we agreed to pay through through May 4th from the April meeting, will continue that through June.
You have that, Madam Clerk? Okay. Any other questions? If not, all those in favor say aye.
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 Anybody opposed? The ayes have it. That carries unanimously. Now we're going to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education school choice vote. Mr. Iovino.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an annual question vote that the Malden School Committee has to take every year. And especially this year with so many uncertainties across the Commonwealth, I would put in a form of a motion, that the Malden Public Schools is in agreement that we will not accept for the 2020-2021 school year, any students, student choice students. In other words, I am saying that the motion, that's my motion. I can clarify it if you wish. And a yes vote would say, yes, you are in agreement that we will not accept them. A no vote, of course, is the opposite.
All right, there's the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. McCarthy. So for purpose of discussion, everybody clear on the motion? Ms.
Mr. Chair,
Spatafora?
I just want to make sure that we're clear because, to be quite honest, my first year sitting up there,
Yeah.
it was a little, you don't quite understand. So I just want to make sure for our new members, they're completely clear on what a no vote versus a yes vote is in regards to this.
Okay.
Because
Mr. Iovino, one more
Yes.
time.
Yes, a no vote, Ms. Spatafora, is that we are in agreement that the Malden Public Schools will not accept school choice students for the 2020-2021 school year. This is an annual question that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education poses to school committees throughout the Commonwealth.
Good
And
thing,
so-
Ms. Spatafora asked that, Mr. Iovino, because I thought you said at the outset a yes vote.
it was opposite the first time, yes.
Yes vote would be not to accept.
Exactly. I'm sorry if I caused confusion. A yes vote is not to accept students,
From
school
outside.
choice students from outside.
Right.
So a yes
Oh,
vote
right.
is not to accept.
Got it. Any questions on that? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 Anybody opposed?
Was I yes? I
Well-
was
Yes.
I thought last time we did a roll call.
Yeah, we have to do a roll call.
Yeah.
Roll call.
I don't think that's required, but we could do it. Madam Clerk? Why don't we call the roll?
Mr. Drummy,
Yes.
Mr. Fryer,
Yes.
Mr. Gray,
Yes.
Mr. Iovino,
Yes.
Ms. Luong,
Yes.
Mr. McCarthy,
Yes.
Ms. Spatafora,
Yes.
Mr. Weldai,
yes.
Mayor Christensen.
Yes. So that carries unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Iovino. Now on to Linden's AEAP program, Mr. Weldai. Mr. Weldai, just for people that are watching, can you just spell out what the program is?
So Linden's, and I'll say Linden's, it's the Accelerated and Enriched Academic Program.
Thank you.
But Mr. O'Terry, Superintendent O'Terry, do you want to give the preface to this or do you want me to dive in?
I think in the interest of time, we spent a lot of time the other day on this, so I'm
Yeah. So just for folks who are watching, this is just the decision. My predecessor, Tara Beardsley, started a committee to study the AEAP program. That has been folded over into the equity committee's work, which a lot of what's happened this spring has prevented a lot of that from going forward. But we're in the midst of student enrollment, and the decision that we needed for the Parent Information Center was regarding the admissions policy for kids joining the AEAP or the gifted program at Linden. Typically, there's a whole process of students needing to submit recommendations, have an evaluation. There's a teacher observation rubric, and what the district was looking for from us. And I was happy to sponsor it through the equity committee. I know that the superintendent and the assistant superintendent put together a couple different options for us. One was the status quo, just let things be the way they are. One was option 2, which was postpone enrollment for the 2021 year and begin, I'm going to say this wrong, begin the program for students entering both grades 1 and grades 2 for the following year, or option 3, which was something for us to sort of come up with tonight if we so felt like we needed to.
All right. What's your recommendation there, Mr. Weldai?
After talking with both the superintendent and the assistant superintendent, I would suggest an option 3, which would be just to postpone enrollment for new students coming into the program. So essentially it's to put a pause on grade 1 for the year because the program starts for grade 1. And so that way, everyone who's currently enrolled in the program just moves up and nothing changes for them while we spend next school year figuring out what we want to do. And then there just wouldn't enroll a new group of kids in first grade, which would be hard to do now anyways, given the conditions of our kindergartners and where they're at.
All right, very good. So do you want to put that in the form of a motion?
I would put that in the form of a motion to approve an option 3 for the AEAP program.
Is there a second? Second by Mr. Iovino for purposes of discussion. So let me go over to our superintendent. Any further thoughts, or did Mr. Weldai summarize it pretty clearly?
I think Mr. Weldai summarized it very clearly. You know, I think as we knew that this time last year, the governing board was coordinating a group to study this, and then former school committee member was, and I don't think anything really came to fruition. And the governing board dissolved into a site council, so it's been sort of unchecked. And you know, enrollment is, as we started looking at next year for enrollment, this, you know, came up. So I think that the option that Mr. Weldai has proposed, I think certainly is probably the one in the best interest of equity and, you know, for the program too. It's not penalizing anybody that's there. It's really just putting it on pause for a year.
There you have it, everyone. Any questions on it? Mr. Gray.
Just a quick question. I need a little clarification. It seems like, Adam, you're describing option 2 as if it's option 3, or am I misreading it? Isn't option 2 saying it's postponing anyways?
Mr. Weldai?
That's a great question. So I had, when I was asking the superintendent and assistant superintendent about this, I had the same question. The way option 2 is written, it's that we would be voting tonight on a phase out. So it would be no grade 1 this year, no grade 2 the next year, no grade 3 the next year. So option 2 is really voting today on May the 4th, May 4th, to get rid of the program for years to come, versus option 3, what I'm hoping we do is just put a pause on grade 1, and then we can take the next year to actually study it and see what we want the future to be.
Oh, okay.
Did I explain that okay?
Yes.
Yeah, it's real weird the way it's written.
Yes.
Yeah, well, we'll clean that up with the clerk. But I think everybody gets the gist, right?
The goal is to make sure that no kid who's currently enrolled in the gifted program at Linden is displaced. So everybody just moves on up.
Mr. Weldai, from the chair, do you think it might impact people who are thinking about it? Is it too late in the game? Are they negatively impacted, or
kids who are going into first grade?
Yeah, like I know some families start, you know, figuring things out for the following year, February, March, but
yeah, I mean, I think there's a chance that, I mean, the people who this affects the most, or really the only people that this affects, are the kindergarten families going into first grade. So they would be the ones that and also the first grade teacher, who is phenomenal as is, but it just affects those kids. So yeah, we would be putting you know, if there was some kindergartner who was, you know, or really more like a kindergarten parent who was very intent on getting their kid into grade 1 gifted, that they would be the ones at a disadvantage.
Well, superintendent, you probably want to communicate this in some fashion, you know, sooner rather than later, just to make sure everybody's aware.
Sure.
Okay. Any other questions before we vote? Mr. Gray.
Just option 2. Could we put some language in there clearly stating that it ends the program? Because I'm not a lawyer. I don't see it.
Mr. Weldai?
Well, yes, but if we vote on option 3, then it wouldn't matter, right? Am I?
Yeah.
Okay.
One more time, Mr. Weldai. What's the motion again?
So the motion would be for us to approve option 3, which is just postpone enrollment for the 2020 to 2021 year for grade 1 gifted, while we take the year to study the future of the program.
And it was seconded by Mr. McCarthy. Madam Clerk, who seconded that?
Mr. Iovino.
Aye.
Mr. Iovino, okay. All right, there you have it, everybody. Any other questions? Ms. Luong.
I just want to, option 3 sounds fine to me and it makes sense. At that time, we can also visit opening this program across all the K through 8s. If that seems to be something we want to do, that's when we would be visiting that program, correct?
So I think part of the problem is it is open to all of the schools, just nobody knows that. And it's such a,
That's what I'm saying. Like, I just feel like it's such a great program and it's just, there's an inequity amongst our, K through 8s. And I just want to make sure that is.
I hope that you're right in a sense that, my goal would be in the equity audits that you and Ms. Spatafora and I are hopefully going to start, getting the meats of soon, that we can look at even expanding the program so that it's in more than one location, so that not all families think, well, if I want my kid to go into gifted, I have to uproot myself from BB and I live on like Highland Ave and drive all the way up to Linden. Yeah,
Right,
I'm with you.
that's what I've been hearing, someone living over here, so even just single parent, no car, they're able to get their child to school, but now it's, all the way across town. So great, good to know. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Luong. Seeing no other lights, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? The ayes have it. That carries unanimously. The last item under motions and resolutions, food service management contract. Ms. Spatafora.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to make this short and sweet so we can move on. So the USDA has issued guidance in regards to our food service contracts. And I don't want to use the word allowing, but suggesting that we extend our food service contracts with our providers for 1 year, if that is doable. They're not saying that you should, but to alleviate any pressures, it could be beneficial. So basically, my motion would be to allow our finance director, our superintendent, to open up communications with our food service management company to see if a 1 year extension to the contract would work. But it's, again, nothing set in stone either. If we're able to provide an RFP and have other services come in that work better for us, then of course, as a district, we would go with that. But it's really just opening up the lines of communication for our administration to be able to do the work necessary right now.
All right, so that's a motion, right, Ms. Spatafora?
That is a motion.
All right, second for purposes of discussion.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Drummy. Questions of Ms. Spatafora? Mr. Drummy.
Is there a contract in place right now, or is it a year-to-year thing?
Superintendent or Ms.
Contract
Spatafora?
in place. I believe it's a 3-year contract.
And where are we now, John? Are we in the middle of one, or are we all done with it? Is the contract ending? Is that why the extension?
I believe we're at the end of this one.
Okay.
So what this did is it enabled districts to continue for the 1 year in the midst of the pandemic, and go forward and continue with the current vendor if you so desire.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? The ayes have it, that carries unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Spatafora. Now we have 3 items left. First one is personal privilege, followed by executive session for the purposes of contract negotiations, followed by adjournment. So I think we'll take points of personal privilege now. We'll then take a motion to go into executive session. We may come back out and act on some of the items within executive session, and then we will move adjournment. So any points of personal privilege before we entertain that motion? Mr. Drummy, he'll be followed by Mr. Weldai.
First of all, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Congratulations, John, to you and your staff. You've done a great job considering what we've had to go through these last several months. So thank you for that. And watching your program Wednesday, with Chief Mollis. You were right. Unfortunately, the Mother's Day breakfast is going to be nil this year. I'm sorry to hear. I mean, I always look forward to that. It's been going on for, God, years, and it's a great thing to look forward to, but unfortunately, now is not a good time. So I know Councilor Crowe is working on something. So I'm not at liberty to say, but she'll get it out to you. But I just want to wish everyone a happy Mother's Day. Please be safe. Be cognizant of what's going on around you. And thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Drummond. Mr. Weldai.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just again, reiterating the comments that have made by a lot of folks. I think Mr. Drummond said it best. Thank you to the superintendent and his team putting all this together over the past couple of weeks with everything that's been thrown at us. In particular, I know the remote learning work and what Dr. Chase and the curriculum directors are doing. And you mentioned keeping everyone a week ahead. It's just so beneficial, and it's a strong program considering everything that's going on around the state. And then I'd like to echo another thank you to Tony Martin in particular for preempting and thinking ahead of us and being there to work with parents around the refunds for the after school program. It was before like the minute school was called for the year, she was already working, and parents got pretty quick communication, and that was really awesome. I think another thank you, and Mr. Iovino and Ms. Spatafora mentioned this at the budget meeting about our state delegation. Between Rep. Altrino, Rep. Donato, Rep. Lipper Garabedian, Senator Lewis, we're getting a ton of communication. I think in particular, just to say thank you to Emily Granoff, who's Jason Lewis's age. She's kept us more informed than I think we've ever been informed before. And that's been phenomenal. Thank you to Ron Cochran for helping us make public comment a reality and running all of these. And then I guess since Mike said it, I can't not say Happy Mother's Day to my favorite Malden Public Schools teacher, my mom. But thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the administration for all the work that you're doing. I mean, we're doing the best we can. We don't know if we're going to get it right all the time, but I mean, the efforts being put in and the way that even this school committee is working together around it has been really great to be a part of.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weldai. Let's go to Mr. Iovino.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have to echo everything that's been said. As a retired educator in the Malden Public Schools, I'm extraordinarily proud of every member of this school committee, of our teaching corps, of our administrative staff. They have done an outstanding job. It just is heartwarming to know that our kids, in the face of this pandemic that nobody could have foreseen, their education is moving forward. It's moving forward differently, but it's moving forward nevertheless. And so a giant thank you to all Malden educators and everybody associated with them, from our lunch crew all the way down to our custodial staff, to everybody. And I will say a happy Mother's Day, and yes, to one of my favorite students, Tina Weldai.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Iovino. Ms. Spatafora.
Thank you so much. So to echo everybody else's, and it is Teacher Appreciation Week, and I want to thank all the teachers, but I also want to thank all the parents that have stepped up to be teachers. These are new jobs that we are not familiar with. It's something that I personally didn't go to school for, and I know parents that did not. So the teachers that are handling the remote learning, I'm so impressed with everything you're doing, but the teachers that are home at the dining room tables, the parents right now, a huge, huge thank you for willing to really step up and take on that. I also just want to thank you, Mayor, and also our City Council for the senior signs. I think this is really a great way for us to show appreciation, to really boost up our seniors, and for them to be able to drive around the city or walk, because we're all trying to get fresh air, and be able to see pictures and have some recognition. A huge, huge thank you for making that happen. And to our principals, our schools don't run without the leadership that they provide. They are one in a million. So when we talk about our educators, our leaders, our principals, just a giant thank you. And honestly, to my colleagues in front of me right now, we've really stepped up. We've made these remote meetings work. We're getting stuff done. And I really appreciate each and every one of you for being here and being present. So thank you to each and every one of you.
Thank you, Ms. Spatafora. And for everybody here at the meeting, if you do see City Councilor and Council President Jadine Sika, really give her a pat in the back. She's been the mastermind behind organizing these signs for our students, and she's not done. She's actually now trying to see if we can also do something for our 8th graders. And I think you all know she's been organizing the different parades throughout our city. So, you know, you want to talk about having a great partner. She's been all that and more. So let's see who else. Mr. Gray, and then we'll go to Ms. Luong.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick comment. Sometimes our children, they may gripe, they may whine a little bit here and there, but in reality, they really love their schools. They miss their teachers, they miss their friends, and they miss their principals. Like I said, you may not hear it all the time and they gripe, but they are lost without the school environment that they've grown up in and that they've grown to love. Trust me, firsthand experience. Sometimes I need to get these kids out of the house and there's nowhere to go and they need to spend time with their friends. So I hope this pandemic thing ends soon. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. Ms. Luong.
Hi, thank you so much. I have a big thank you to give to Principal Mastrangelo and his team, as well as to Superintendent O'Terry. I have 2 kids, you know, senior and a freshman, and they both had great experiences during this virus and what they've been delivered. And I just think what they've accomplished in such a short amount of time, your team has been amazing. I also think that this really, as a school department, gives us an opportunity, even though this virus and pandemic has been a terrible thing. I think it's opened up our eyes to what actually works remotely, what type of communications that's actually worked well, you know, for families. I'm sure, you know, the K through 5s, they've had some consistent approaches on how, you know, they're delivered, you know, communications with their teachers. And I think that together we're able to bring back some of that stuff next year, the good parts of all of that. And I also just want to say thank you to everybody, and thank you to you, Mr. Chairman, for always being supportive for everything in the past 8 years, especially the past 12 years for my older daughter, who's off to college. Thank goodness. She's off to, yeah, congratulations to, you know, her and the rest of the seniors. I'm extremely proud of her. She, you know, and it's only because collaboratively through the years, we have always worked as a team with parents and teachers and administrators. And it's nice to see that we've done that. And it's also nice to see that we can move that forward.
Very well said. Okay. Any other comments, Mr. Froyo?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to say Happy Mother's Day to my wonderful wife, Judy. And I also would like to say to everybody in Malden, please stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy Mother's Day, Judy.
And just so everyone knows, there'll be another briefing this Wednesday night at 7 o'clock, which can be viewed on local access as well as the City of Malden's YouTube channel. And you can either email or write your questions in, or you can call the studio at MATV. And we're going to have this week our health director, of course, Chris Webb. We're also going to have Alex Pratt from the Malden Redevelopment Authority, who's going to talk about rental assistance and how we see that program rolling out. And we're going to have our state senator, Jason Lewis, on hand as well. He'll talk about what's happening at the state level. From my perspective, you covered most of it, you know, pretty much all of it. But for me, you know, one thing that when we get past this that I'll remember for a long time is just some of the really heartwarming stories that I've seen. Just as I was talking to you now, a text came in from Patty Kelly at the Bread of Life, and she was calling to say how grateful she was that Encore Boston Harbor called, our city to donate flowers that they could use for the people who come to the Bread of Life, as well as for Mr. Drummy and Miss Crow's Mother's Day event. They also donated soap and shampoo, for those in need. So there's been a ton of those stories that have happened throughout the past several weeks. And, it's just really great to see. And then let me just end by also making sure that when you send those accolades my way, they really should be sent to Maria Louise. I mean, I think you all must admit that you go to her before me. And so I just want to publicly
No argument there.
take a moment to say thank you to her. And then, if you finally, I just really, once again, I want to circle back to Miss Chewicki and our student representative and all her classmates. In my 20 years of public service, I've never seen a more resilient class than the class of 2020. I communicate with many of them, as you know, through Instagram and other social media channels. And they have taken this like you would expect them to. And, I just wanted to publicly thank her and her classmates for, what they have meant to us over the years here in Malden. So with that being said, we'll now entertain a motion to go into executive session for the purposes of contract negotiations.
Motion.
Motion by Ms. Spatafora, seconded by Mr. Iovino. Now the clerk will call the roll.
Can we?
Clerk will
Mr.
call.
Drummy?
Yes.
Mr. Froyo?
Yes.
Mr. Gray?
Yes.
Mr. Iovino?
Yes.
Ms. Luong?
Yes.
Mr. McCarthy?
Yes.
Ms. Spatafora?
Yes.
Mr. Weldai?
Yes.
Mayor Christensen?
Yes. All right, we'll now go into executive session.
Mr.
Can we
Mayor,
have
if I
a
may,
5-minute potty break?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes. Yep.
just wanted to remind all the participants that are going to be going into executive session that the credentials have been shared via email.
Yep.
And for those to enter executive session, please do not disconnect your current Zoom session. Simply mute audio and video, and then when executive session is complete, return to this Zoom call.
Mr. Mayor,
You do, Judy, just mute it.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to take this moment if I could. I was remiss, I skipped over my report, but this is the holy month of Ramadan for our Muslim families, and I'd like to acknowledge that and pass that along with our best wishes. And we're making sure that we acknowledge that everyone's aware of that this is Ramadan, and I know our staff is aware of that as well.
You're muted, Mr. Mayor.
So everybody mute and mute their video, okay? Or
Thank
stop
you.
video, I guess it is.
You get 5 minutes.
5 minutes, 8:37, 8:40.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, Rob, we're on conference.
That was off.
All four of us came back.
Hi, John. It's the worst call I've ever.
Lenny, you there?
Can't hear you, Gary.
Yeah, I'm waiting on Lenny.
Oh, there you are. Lenny, okay.
Gare, can you manually unmute Lenny?
Yeah, I did. He's just not back.
Oh.
You are unmuted by host.
Okay, here he is. All right.
There he is.
All right, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Motion by Mr. Weldai, seconded by Ms. Spatafora. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? School committee is hereby adjourned.
Wonderful.
Stay safe,
All right, everybody.
everybody.
Yep, see you later.
Ciao.
All right, good work.
Take care, all.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Yes.